Richard leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands behind his head as though he had just delivered a profound insight. Women just don't have the head for this kind of thing, he said with a tone that dripped with unearned authority. It's not personal, Sandra, he added, as if that would soften the blow. Finance is a high-pressure game. Kevin's the natural choice for something like this. Across the table, I tightened my jaw, refusing to let the frustration bubbling inside show on my face. My hands itched to crumple the meticulously prepared spreadsheet in front of me, the one I had spent hours perfecting. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to remain composed. Richard, I began, keeping my voice even. I've been managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for 6 years. My firm's performance has consistently ranked in the top 5 in the region. He waved a dismissive hand. I'm sure you're great at what you do over there, but this is family. We need someone who understands our specific goals, and Kevin knows what's at stake. I glanced at Kevin, seated smugly beside him. He grinned, exuding an air of confidence that was infuriatingly unwarranted. Kevin was 24, fresh out of business school, and had never even balanced a personal budget, let alone managed an investment portfolio. But he was Richard's biological son, which, in their eyes, apparently made him a financial prodigy. Kevin, I said, turning to him and keeping my tone neutral. What's your plan for managing the portfolio? Caught off guard, he blinked and stammered. Well, I thought I'd start with some high-growth tech stocks, ride the wave. Richard nodded approvingly, as if Kevin had just outlined a brilliant strategy. Exactly. Bold moves. That's what this portfolio needs. My stomach churned. Bold moves? That was their plan? After years of analyzing risk and reward, building diversified portfolios, and studying market trends, I was being told my expertise wasn't enough. Because I was a woman. This wasn't the first time I'd had to fight to be taken seriously in a male-dominated industry. But this wasn't just another dismissive colleague. This was my stepfather. Someone who had been a part of my life since I was 12, choosing to overlook my qualifications in favor of my stepbrother. Richard had always been stern but fair in his own way, treating Kevin and me equally until now. His favoritism had grown more blatant over the years, but it had never been clearer than in this moment. The family portfolio wasn't just a casual investment. It was a culmination of years of hard work meant to secure a comfortable future for all of us. I had pored over the numbers, crafting a comprehensive plan to maximize returns while mitigating risk. None of that mattered. Richard's biases ran deeper than I had realized. As I drove home that evening, frustration simmered inside me. It's not personal, Richard had said, but it couldn't have felt more personal. I had spent years proving myself in an industry where being underestimated was routine, only to have my own family dismiss my capabilities entirely. When I walked through the door, my husband Mike was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up and smiled. How'd it go? It was a disaster, I replied, dropping my bag onto the counter. Richard handed the portfolio to Kevin. Apparently, women aren't cut out for finance. Mike frowned, setting down the knife. He actually said that. Verbatim, I said, pouring myself a glass of water. And Kevin just sat there grinning like he'd already made his first million. Mike shook his head. That's ridiculous. You've been doing this for years. Kevin probably doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet. Exactly, I said, my voice rising. But it doesn't matter. Richard sees me as a risk and Kevin as a reward. Even though the numbers say the opposite, that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to change Richard's mind. Instead, I would let my work speak for itself. My firm's portfolio was growing steadily, and I was already in talks to lead a high-stakes project that could put my team on the map. If Richard wanted to believe Kevin was a financial genius, fine. In a year, when the dust settled, the results would tell the real story. In the weeks that followed, I tried not to think about the family portfolio. It wasn't easy. Every time Kevin posted vague, crushing it in finance, updates on social media, or Richard made offhand comments about Kevin's big plans, my blood boiled. But I poured all my energy into my own work. At my firm, things were moving quickly. I had been assigned to manage a high-profile client portfolio and threw myself into crafting a strategy that was both innovative and airtight. Late nights at the office became the norm. The hours spent analyzing trends and running projections were exhausting, but deeply rewarding. My colleague and mentor, Laura, noticed my extra effort one evening as we worked late. "You're really going all in on this one, aren't you?" she said, leaning against my desk. I nodded, smiling faintly. "It feels personal." "The client?" she asked. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "My stepfather. He passed me over from managing the family's portfolio. Gave it to my stepbrother instead. Said women aren't cut out for finance." Her eyes widened. "He actually said that?" "Yep," I said, bitterness thick in my voice. So now I'm making it my mission to prove him wrong. Meanwhile, back at home, cracks in Kevin's supposed success began to show. At family dinners, Richard's once proud updates about Kevin's investments became more vague. "It's a long-term strategy," Richard said one evening when I asked about the portfolio's performance. "Long-term?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's code for it's not working right now." "What's he investing in exactly?" Richard bristled. "It's none of your concern, Sandra. Kevin has it under control." I let it go, but inside, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Overconfident investors chasing high-risk stocks without understanding the market were a tale as old as time. It was only a matter of time before Kevin's strategy imploded. At work, things were moving in the opposite direction. The portfolio I managed began outperforming expectations, and clients were thrilled with the returns. Word spread quickly, and I was soon invited to present my strategy at a regional finance conference. The recognition was a career milestone, one I had worked tirelessly to achieve. The night before the conference, as I rehearsed my presentation in the mirror, I thought about Richard and Kevin. A part of me wanted to send them an invite just to see their faces when I walked on stage, but I resisted. This wasn't about them. This was about proving to myself and the industry that I belonged here. Months passed, and the disparity between Kevin's performance and mine became impossible to ignore. While my firm's results continued to thrive, the family portfolio struggled under the weight of Kevin's poor decisions. At a family dinner, Richard sighed heavily as we passed dessert. "It's been a rough quarter," he admitted. "Kevin's portfolio has taken some hits." I glanced up from my plate, keeping my expression neutral. "Hits? What kind of hits?" Richard hesitated. "Nothing catastrophic," he said quickly. "Just some setbacks." Kevin, unusually quiet all evening, chimed in defensively. "It's a tough market right now. No one's seeing big returns." "That's not true," I said before I could stop myself. "Plenty of portfolios are thriving, if they're managed well." The room fell silent. Richard's glare burned into me, but I didn't care. My results spoke for themselves. By the 1-year mark, the truth was undeniable. Kevin's portfolio had faltered under poor planning and overconfidence. Meanwhile, my work was being featured in industry publications, and I was named one of the top financial analysts in the region. That evening, as I accepted an award for innovative portfolio management, I thought about Richard and Kevin. They weren't in the audience, but I knew they'd hear about this. And when Richard called 2 weeks later to ask for my help with the family portfolio, I knew I had finally earned more than his recognition. I had proven my worth to myself. The breakthrough in my career arrived in the most unexpected manner. Richard, my stepfather, had always prided himself on being well informed about the financial markets. He kept up with industry magazines, religiously watched the news, and was always confident in his knowledge. However, one evening, as I was wrapping up a presentation at work, my phone rang. It was Mike, my husband, and his voice was filled with excitement and amusement. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Richard's glued to the TV. Your firm's results are being featured on Market Watch Live, and they just mentioned your name. I froze as Mike's words sank in. The weight of his statement was overwhelming. What did they say? I asked, my heart racing. They called you one of the top-performing portfolio managers in the region, Mike replied. For a moment, I was in disbelief. Richard had always been skeptical of my abilities, dismissing my achievements and contributions. Yet here was national television giving recognition to my hard work. Richard, the man who had often undermined my professional efforts, was now hearing about them from the very media outlets he valued so much. The next day, Richard called me. His voice was notably different, softer, almost subdued. Sandra, he began, I saw the segment on Market Watch last night. I had no idea your firm was doing so well. I allowed his words to linger for a moment before responding with a calm, measured tone. Thank you, I said. We've been working hard. There was a pause before Richard spoke again. I have to admit, I may have misjudged you. Your results are impressive. I allowed myself a small, quiet sense of satisfaction. I appreciate you saying that, I replied, but it's not about the recognition. It's about making smart, informed decisions, and that's something I've been doing for years. Richard didn't respond immediately, and when he finally did, his voice held an unfamiliar vulnerability. Do you have time to come by this weekend? I'd like to talk. When I arrived at Richard's house on Saturday, the atmosphere felt different. He greeted me at the door without his usual confidence, and Kevin, his usual companion, wasn't around. The change in dynamic was palpable. We sat down in the living room, and Richard handed me a folder containing the latest figures from the family portfolio. These are the latest figures, Richard said, his voice lower than usual. I thought you might want to take a look. As I opened the folder, the numbers were worse than I had anticipated. The portfolio had taken a significant hit. Several high-risk investments had tanked, resulting in major losses. It was a stark contrast to the growth I had managed for my firm's clients. Kevin told me it was just market volatility, Richard said, breaking the silence. But after seeing your results, I'm starting to think it might be something else. I chose my words carefully. It's not just the market. It's about the decisions being made. Managing a portfolio requires more than bold moves. It requires strategy, discipline, and a deep understanding of risk. Richard nodded slowly, his expression pained. I thought I was doing the right thing by giving Kevin control. I wanted to give him a chance to prove himself. But now I see that I underestimated you and overestimated him. Hearing those words from Richard was surreal. For so long, I had fought to be taken seriously, to prove my worth in a family that never fully saw me as capable. Richard had dismissed my abilities, refusing to acknowledge the hard work I put in. Now, sitting across from him, I saw something that had been absent for all those years, regret. I owe you an apology, Sandra, Richard said quietly. I let my biases cloud my judgment. You've worked so hard, and I didn't give you the credit you deserved. That was wrong. The words I had longed to hear felt bittersweet. The vindication I had craved was finally here, but it wasn't the moment I had expected. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. But this isn't just about me. It's about what's best for the family. If you want the portfolio to recover, we need to make some serious changes. Richard nodded, his expression resolute. I'd like you to take over, he said. If you're willing. I spent the next hour walking Richard through my recommendations. I outlined a strategy to stabilize the portfolio, emphasizing diversification and risk management, all while keeping the family's long-term goals in mind. It wouldn't be easy, but I was confident we could rebuild. As I explained my plan, I saw something shift in Richard's demeanor, a recognition, an unspoken respect that had been missing for so long. When we finished, Richard leaned back in his chair, let out a deep sigh, and said, Sandra, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do this. Not after the way I treated you. But you did. That says a lot about your character. I smiled, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. This isn't about proving a point, I said. It's about doing what's right for everyone. In the days that followed, things felt strangely calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of frustration when thinking about Richard. He had finally acknowledged my abilities, not just as a financial professional, but as someone worthy of his respect. It wasn't an instant fix for the years of dismissal, but it was a start. At the next family dinner, the usual tension surrounding finances was absent. Richard even mentioned the new strategy one had proposed. Sandra's got the portfolio on the right track, he said, looking at me across the table. I should have listened to her sooner. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. He had been noticeably quiet since Richard had taken back control of the portfolio, and I could see the flicker of resentment in his expression. Part of me wanted to gloat, but I quickly pushed the thought aside. This wasn't about Kevin. It was about securing the family's financial future. Later that evening, as I helped clear the table, Richard pulled me aside again. His voice was low, almost apologetic. I know I've said it before, he began, but I really am sorry for how I treated you. I let my biases get in the way, and I was wrong. I looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Thank you, Richard, I said. That means a lot, and I want you to know I'm not holding any grudges. I just want to make sure we're all moving in the right direction. He nodded, his expression softening. You've got my full support from now on. I'm trusting you to handle things. Those words felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For so long, I had fought to be seen and respected, not just for my capabilities, but for my place in the family. Now, I finally felt validated, not because I had won, but because Richard had grown enough to acknowledge the truth. Over the next several months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. With Richard's full support, I took over managing the family portfolio. The work wasn't just about undoing Kevin's mistakes. It was about building a portfolio that could withstand future challenges. I created a strategy that was balanced, diversified, and designed to grow steadily over time. The results came slowly but steadily. Within 6 months, the portfolio began to recover. Richard stayed out of my way, only offering thoughtful questions or genuine praise as he saw the portfolio improve. The change in him was stark, a far cry from the man who had once outright dismissed me. But more than respect, what had changed was trust. For the first time, Richard saw me not just as a stepdaughter, but as a capable professional. One evening, as we sat together reviewing the latest performance reports, Richard leaned back in his chair and sighed. You know, Sandra, he said thoughtfully, I used to think I had all the answers. But this past year has taught me something important. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who surprise you the most. I smiled, setting down the report. It's never too late to learn, I said gently. Richard nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. You've done more for this family than I can put into words. Thank you. Hearing those words felt like the closure I hadn't known I needed. For so long, I had been driven by the need to prove myself. But now, that drive felt different. It wasn't about validation anymore. It was about knowing my worth and standing firm in it. Outside of the family, my career continued to thrive. The success with the family portfolio had drawn the attention of new clients, opening doors to new opportunities and challenges. The recognition I had received at the awards gala was only the beginning, and I finally felt like I was stepping into the career I had always dreamed of. At home, the dynamic with Richard had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. He was more supportive, not just of my professional endeavors, but of me as a person. The tension that had once defined our relationship was replaced with mutual respect. It didn't erase the past, but it gave me hope for the future. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught me something invaluable. You can't force people to see your worth. Sometimes, you have to keep doing the work, letting your results speak louder than their doubts. When recognition finally comes, it's not about receiving an apology. It's about knowing that you've always been capable, even when others couldn't see it. As I left Richard's house that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I had finally claimed my place, not just in the family, but in my own life.